Live from the chicken wing capital of the world, Buffalo, New York. You're listening to the Childcare Bridge podcast, your source for the best tips, tools, and tactics on how to market and grow your childcare center, ensuring total domination. Total domination. This is the Childcare Bridge, and this is your host, Michael Tasner.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 18 of the Childcare Bridge. Today's topic is about going from where you're at to a 10x future. Whatever that means for you based on where things currently are. Now, the reason that this topic came up and why I'm teaching this concept today is that one of our listeners from Louisiana wrote in and said, Michael, I've got a 2-location business with capacity of right around 300 in total. And I envy people that have 10 locations or more. And there were a bunch of other bullets underneath with questions and such. But really what they're looking for is how do you go from a 2-location business to 10, 15, 20, but even more so, what are the shifts that need to occur to make that happen? Is it just, well, you go and you buy 8 other locations, for example, and now you've got 10? Or is there some other different things that need to occur? Now, what I found to be really, really interesting is that this question was asked about a week and a half ago, and I just finished listening to the audio version of a book written by Dan Sullivan titled 10X is Easier Than 2X. And the book completely has changed my mindset, like overnight, on a lot of strategic things that I was thinking for this upcoming year. So every now and then, there is a book, a course, a seminar, a speaker, a quote, something that I see, hear, listen to, watch, that completely changes my thinking. And I have always believed that the right content, the right teacher, mentor, trainer, educator will show up at the right time, as long as you're then ready to kind of receive what they're going to be teaching or whatever that lesson may be. And I've heard similar concepts like this that were taught in the book over the last couple of years, but it didn't click until this past week. And it would be an understatement to say that I literally am, as we speak, changing a lot of our strategic direction that I was planning for next year. I'm literally throwing it on its head. So I wanted to kind of teach you a little bit about this, but I wanted to throw a challenge to you and say, you are thinking way too small. I was thinking way too small. So I'll give you an example. So next year, our goal across my agency and our various businesses that serve childcare center owners like yourself was to double in size. So we wanted to double. And that's an ambitious goal. And we were looking at it saying, okay, great. Well, how could we do that? Would it be adding, 200 more centers that we're working with, for example? Like what does it look like? Is it the pricing? And we looked at all these different strategies. And I was excited about the goal of doubling. But after going through and listening to this book and realizing that the industry needs so much more help, that goal of 2x is too small. Now, the thing that I want you to keep in mind as we talk through 10x, there is no predetermined timeline. So this isn't me saying you need to 10x your center from, if you're at 1 location to 10 locations by the end of next year. It's more of a framework and a way of thinking. And it's a framework where you're going to really have to start thinking about your thinking, as Dan Sullivan likes to say. So when we looked at it and we were saying, great, we wanted to double, it meant us doing a lot more of what we've been doing. But this concept of 10x is for you to really start thinking outside of the box. And I'll just use simple numbers. Let's say this year you did $1 million in revenue. Let's say you had one location, or we'll use the example from the center in Louisiana that had two. Let's say at those numbers, I'm just going to do some rough math off the top of my head. You'd probably be ideally with that amount of enrollment closer to a $2 million a year business. So my challenge to you, and going back to the original question of, well, what does it take to go from like 2 locations to 10, is it requires different thinking. That sounds strange. I thought that was strange until it really started to click. So hear me out and stick with me on this, because once you start to grasp it, I think you're going to hopefully be excited, but it's also one of those concepts that now I can't unlearn. Like I can't unhear it. And now all that I'm thinking about is this concept. And as I said, I'm literally retooling everything. We're redoing brand stuff, logos, looking at additional business. Like we're literally throwing everything, not throwing everything out the door, but like leaving no stone unturned as we start to go on this path. So when I say the difference between 2 locations and 10 is just different thinking, the first piece is you need to actually know that it's possible. A lot of childcare center owners, it's not even, they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but they almost feel unworthy. They almost feel like, well, geez, if I had that many locations, I'd have lots of extra income. And like, do I really need all that? Like, am I owed that? Like, am I worth it? Like, you get all these limiting beliefs. So the first step, quite frankly, is committing to knowing that, yeah, this is you. Like, this is what you were destined to do. Because if I look at having 2 locations or having 10, for example, the amount of impact you can make is insane. Like when I look at the centers that we're working with that have 5, 10, 15, 20 plus locations, I mean, they're impacting the lives of thousands and thousands of families every single year. Now, it's a great thing to say that you're impacting 50 families or 100 families or 200 families every single year. That is extremely noble, and you're doing amazing work. But if you were able to remove that limiting belief that you couldn't do this at a much higher level, you're going to continue to stay at those levels. But what if you were impacting 1,000 families, 2,000 families, 5,000 families each and every year? But the interesting piece to all of this is that I actually learned that in going through the book, that moving from 1x to 2x is actually harder than going from 1x to 10x. So let's say you did $1 million and you want to say, I want to double, I want to do $2 million. It's actually easier to go from doing $1 million to doing 10 million. Michael, how does that make sense? It requires different thinking. It requires different strategies. So if I look at a 2x level of thinking, that would say, okay, great. Let's add another location next year. Let's add another one the year after. And you kind of have this plan of kind of chipping away and grabbing an additional location every year for, let's call it 10 years. Now that's great, but that's also a lot of work because you're having to go through all of that same acquisition process. And is their license still good? And all the new staff and people. And then you're having to repeat that every single year for 10 years. Now you will have achieved that 10x. And as I told you, there's no timeline. But if I look at that strategy, which is what a lot of the centers that we work with have done, they've added 1 or 2 locations every year for X amount of time. Great strategy, but it's a lot of work. So what could you do to make less work and achieve the same result? So let's just brainstorm. First, what if you were to buy a 5-location center? What if you were to buy the biggest center that has 10 locations and you currently have 1 location and you end up acquiring a 10-location business? You just 10x'd. The same amount of work, You're going to have to go through all the due diligence and analyze everything and look at all the numbers and all of that stuff, but was much less work in the end of you having to do it every single year for 10 years. But maybe over the course of 3 years, you draft an agreement where you're going to buy all 10 locations and you take over everything, but you buy a portion of it. And I'm not going to get so in the weeds on how you'd structure this because that's not the point of today's episode. But what if you changed your thinking, instead of just thinking you can only buy or start a one location center at a time to buying a bigger business? What if you changed your mind a little bit and said, you're in the childcare space, but what if you took all the families that you have and you were to have other services or products that they could purchase? So what if you acquired a martial arts studio, a dance studio, a gymnastics studio, a trampoline park? I'm not saying go and buy every single one of these right out of the gate, but if you have that audience already of engaged families, and then you all of a sudden have another business that either you're partnering with, you started, you acquired. Again, this episode, we're not going to get so in the weeds on how to fully deploy this strategy, but what I'm trying to show you is that it's different thinking. The only difference between having 2 locations and having 10, and getting to 10 rather, is the different type of thinking that you need to have. So instead of just thinking, let's open one more location every single year, start looking at some of the bigger businesses that you could acquire. How could you 10x the amount of revenue that you're getting from that family over the course of a couple of years, for example? What if you were only focusing on preschool, for example, but you started putting all these amazing programs in place so that you're attracting more infants in those types of families? So instead of you having an enrollment for 1 year, all of a sudden you're getting an enrollment for 4 years. You just 4x'd your business by changing your thinking and just changing up a few things. So it's different thinking, but it's also building in the time to actually do this level of thinking. And that is going to be the challenging piece. Instead of just looking at growing your revenue next year, my challenge for you is remove all the limitations, remove all the negative thinking, remove anything that's going to stop or block you, and say, how could I 10x? And if you need to throw a timeline on it, call it 3 years. And if that's going from 1 million to 10, what are some of the things that need to happen? But more so, who do I have to become to be that 10x business owner? Am I doing the same things every single day that I'm doing now? For example, if you're in and you're having to teach in one of the classrooms, you're having to fill in as the lunch person, you're answering phones, that's not going to be 10x activities. Your personal activities need to start to change. So what do you need to do? Who do you need to become? If you say, well, Michael, it's going to be around acquisitions, it's going to be around strategic partnerships. What if you took your curriculum and you license your curriculum? And now all of a sudden you have all these centers that are licensing your curriculum and you're making tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars from licensing your curriculum. It's a different level of thinking rather than just, let's just continue to grow enrollments. Let's just add one location every couple of years, for example. It's thinking much bigger, but it's also really getting more in tune with the activities that you're executing. What are the things that you need to stop doing, start doing? How can you actually have a self-managing center? And if you go back to one of my first episodes of what I call a no-joke childcare center, that's having your marketing on fire, your money, so all the financials, manpower, so hiring, culture, all that fun stuff, and your methodologies. So systems, processes, vision, all those 4 M's need to be completely dialed in so that you can start to have a self-managing center. So now you can spend and invest your time in this higher level stuff, this 10x type of activities. But what I wanted to do today was to push back and say, you're thinking too small, and that this is a lot easier to grow rapidly than it is to just grow slowly or a little bit more steadily. The crazy thing is, even with a 5-location or acquiring a 10-location business, doesn't mean that the cash is not there. You could find a center owner that just wants to be paid every single month, and they're literally willing to hand the keys to the kingdom. I have seen this not even dozens, but hundreds of times in my 10 years of working in this industry, where our clients have literally basically gotten handed the keys with very, very little, if any, cash out of pocket to a fully operating center. And then they've applied their methodologies, their systems, their money methodologies, their marketing, and essentially added that jet fuel to then start to reinvigorate the center and move that forward. So take the concept of 2x is a lot harder than 10x and do some thinking over the next couple of weeks of, if you were to 10x, what would that look like? And again, what are some of the things that you need to stop doing? What are some of the things that you need to start doing? What needs to change? Because if I go back to that question of, well, Michael, I've got a 2-location business. I want to have a 10-location business. What are all those different gaps in between? Yes, there's going to be certain skill set gaps and different things that you're going to have to fully understand. But I can tell you that the centers that we're working with, the owners in particular of the businesses that are doing $5, $10, $15, $20 million or more a year, they're focused on high level activities. They're focused on what else they can do to rapidly grow. They're focused on intellectual property. We're doing a lot of stuff with brands, so making sure that their brand is the main brand. It's front and center in their community. They're doing really creative things with partnering with, again, and or acquiring complementary businesses so that they're then taking all those families that they have and instead of just referring them to XYZ dance studio, they're saying, hey, you got to join this dance studio, and because you attend our center, you're going to get 20% off. And they actually own the different centers, these different dance studios. And they're getting that cash stream. So it's a much higher level of thinking. It's a much higher level of the types of activities. But you know that I don't love to talk in theory, and this was a lot more of a theory podcast episode. But it's really challenging you to take a step back, pause, write a bunch of stuff down. What could 10x look like? And I want you to condense the timeline down, at least initially. And don't start mapping it out saying, well, year 1, we're going to do this. But rather, let's just say you want a 10x in 3 years or 10x in a year or 2 years. Just think with a more condensed timeline. What would that have to look like? And who do I have to become? What do I have to start doing, stop doing? And what you're going to find is that a lot of that lower level activity stuff that you're doing currently, you've got to find a way to get that stuff off your plate. You've got to have, whether that's a virtual assistant, other people within your team, you need to bring in additional resources. You need to make sure that you are starting to move into that business owner that isn't having to pull all the strings all day, every day, so that you have that self-managing center. The center that runs without you having to be involved every second of the day. Now, again, that's going to take some time for some of you. That could take all of next year. But if you know that you have your end in mind, and these are the types of people that we love working with, the ones that want much bigger things. I get excited about thinking of someone going from a 1 center location to 10, 20, 50. We have some center owners that have a lot of locations. And the level that they're playing at and the impact that they're making on families is unthinkable to me. Like, I wouldn't have even thought possible to see some of these centers that are impacting, again, thousands and thousands of families every single month with amazing programs and putting kids on the right path in life so that they can make that impact later in life. Like, you are providing such an amazing service to the community. I want you to do it at a much, much higher level. Think about that. 10x is easier than 2xing your business. It just requires different activities and different thoughts. I'd love to hear what you thought about the concept today, the episode. Leave some questions, comments, thoughts. I am always here for you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Holidays are right around the corner. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Festivus if you're a Seinfeld lover. And I will catch up with you soon. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.